I now offer one-on-one services if you want to look at your Oscar data together or your Sleep HQ data, or you want to just have a conversation one-on-one, you want to understand this space a little bit better. There's a link in the description. That said, I'm going to continue to dump everything I know into this channel so that such a link in the future could not possibly hold any additional value. But if you want the option, it's there for you. The feedback so far has been super positive, honestly, and has encouraged me to want to actually put more time into this. It seems to be helping a lot of patients. All I can promise you guys is that I'll look at all the information that you can provide me, and I'll do my best to push you in the right direction, configure or troubleshoot your settings so that you can get better quality sleep or better therapy. I'm not a magician, I'm not the Messiah, but I do understand this stuff, and I do know how to look at the data and use the data to drive our decision making. So if you want the option, it's there. If not, just stay tuned. All these videos are going to be free. They're always going to stay free, and so on. So let's get on to the video. A top contender for one of the questions I get the most. By the time I'm finished with you guys, you're going to be the ones out there answering the questions of, can someone explain my WatchPAT test for me? So let's just jump right into it. I don't like to waste time. You guys don't like to waste time. We got sleep disordered breathing to cure. So let's start in the tables section. Pretty self-explanatory. This is when you turn the device on. So at 11:09 p.m., 35 seconds, device gets turned off at the end study time, which is 5:48 a.m. And then, of course, the total study time is that difference. Sleep time, though, is the time that you're actually sleeping during the study time. So this is typically going to be a little bit different than the total study time. And of course, this is an imperfect measurement, but the device and its channels do the best job that it can at determining what amount of that time you were actually asleep versus just having the device on. So 14.4% of the total sleep time was spent in the sleep stage REM, rapid eye movement, which is different, of course, than non-REM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. Remember, it's non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, and REM. And typically, you progress through the sleep stages in non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, non-REM 2, REM. And then you repeat. REM sleep is looked at differently than non-REM sleep because they're fundamentally different. All stages of sleep are obviously fundamentally different, but REM sleep is a little bit more special, we can say. There are physiological changes, there are, of course, EEG changes, but I guess most importantly, there are changes in typically the severity of the sleep disordered breathing. Typically, it presents worse. It's not always the case. It actually can be reversed, but typically, sleep disordered breathing is going to be worse during REM sleep. And this has to do with a couple reasons. One of them is just that you have greater muscle paralysis and the airway is going to be more collapsible, but also, central respiratory drive goes down, your sensitivity to hypoxia and hypercapnia goes down, and so on and so forth. The depths of that discussion will be saved for another video, but I just wanted to, provide an overture for why we're isolating REM and looking at it a little bit differently. Okay, down here to the respiratory indices. So I'm going to start here with PAHI. You guys probably already know what AHI is, but if not, it's the apnea-hypopnea index. You're adding apneas and hypopneas and then figuring out how many of those on average are occurring per hour. Why is the P there? Well, the P is there just to remind readers that this isn't a true AHI because we're using a device which can't actually detect the true criteria of a true AHI. The WatchPAT is using a method called peripheral arterial tonometry to determine or to guesstimate these events. And so it's fundamentally different. There is no EEG signal. There is no nasal cannula. There is no flow curve generated by the CPAP. But essentially, it's doing its best job to measure the AHI and then the RDI. So the RDI, of course, just above is the slightly more sensitive, but still incomplete, let us add, measurement of sleep disordered breathing. And once again, the P is included to indicate that it's peripheral arterial tonometry. telemetry, and it's not a true RDI, as in the RDI that you would get, for example, from a type 3 study or a type 1 study. This is a type 4 study. The PRDI, we had 124 events in the entire night. So total events, this is the total number of events that fall under the RDI definition that occurred while asleep. And we know that because just below the table, you can see that it says indices are calculated using valid sleep time of 4 hours and 50 minutes. So 91 then is the total number of events which fall under the AHI definition. 56 is the total number of events which fall under the ODI definition. ODI stands for the oxygen desaturation index, which is the number of times the oxygen desaturates, which looks like at 3% is the threshold. Typically it's 3 or 4%. These are arbitrary. It used to be 4%. Now then later they started doing 3%. But basically, oxygen desaturation events that are at least 3%. We had 56 of those throughout the sleep time. And below this, we have the PAHI-C, which is the central AHI, or the number of events which are central apneas or central hypopneas during the total sleep time, and there were only 4. Percent CSR just below is the percentage of the sleep time that was spent with Cheyne-Stokes respiration breathing, which is a form of periodic breathing. Now, on this side of the table, these numbers are the average per hour. So when you see 47.1 here, it's saying the RDI during REM sleep was 47.1. Or in other words, there were 47.1 events on average per hour during REM sleep. And this number was lower during non-REM sleep. So reading this, we would say there were 22 events per hour on average during non-REM sleep. And if you combine these two, you meet at a number that's between them, of course, somewhere in the middle. And that number is 25.6. This is kind of the most important number in this whole page. The RDI, we can say, is 25.6, which includes during REM and non-REM. And the average number of events per hour is 25.6. And of course, the same logic is applied to the AHI. There was 14.0 events on average per hour during non-REM sleep. So naturally, you can ask, well, why are these two numbers different? Well, the difference is basically the number of respiratory effort-related arousals, right? RDI is a little bit more sensitive, and it's including the VERAs. So same thing with the ODI. To what I was saying earlier, you can see that the desaturations during REM sleep are much higher than during non-REM sleep, but the average across the night, that is the number of this number here, represents the average number of desaturations per hour over the course of the night. So we could say, on average, this patient had 11.6 desaturations per hour. Some hours might be more, some hours might be less. Okay, onto the oxygen saturation statistics. The mean. Mean just means average. There are actually different ways to ask what an average is. Mean is like, these are means down here. These values are means. So it's a certain type of average. It's the most commonly used type of average. So just read here, average. The average oxygen level as a percentage is 96%. The minimum is 86%. The maximum is 99%. So if you were to take all the lowest points of oxygen desaturation and then average them, this is the number that we get. Nadir's just means like the lowest point. Okay, here, oxygen desaturation percent. So this is saying, well, how low were the oxygen desaturations? The lower the oxygen desaturations, obviously the worse it is, right? Because we need oxygen. So if we're having lots of large dips, that can start to suggest a more significant problem. So if we look here, events number, again, we have 55. What they're saying is there were 55 desaturations between 4 and 9%. So that is, imagine you're at our average. So we're at 96, and it's saying we dropped 55 times, somewhere between 4 and 9%. Or, in other words, 55 times throughout the night, we dropped from either 4, so 96 minus 4 would be 92, or up to 9, which is 96 minus 9 is 87. So 55 times throughout the night, oxygen dropped from its baseline between 4 and 9%. There was one time that it dropped between 10 and 20%. So we don't know unless we look at the raw data, right? This could be 11% or it could be 20%. And then 0 times it dropped over 20%. Well, that's good. And then here's the total, pretty obvious. And this is just telling you what percentage this range of drops represents of all the drops. So in other words, 98.2% of all the oxygen desaturation drops were within the 4 to 9%. And only 1.8% were between 10 and 20, and then of course 0% of them were over 20. This just breaks down how much time you spent at low levels of oxygen. So this is in minutes, so not even 1 minute was spent below 90, that's good. Not even 1 minute was spent below 88, 0 minutes, blah, 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 right? 0 minutes spent below 70% oxygen. And this is a percentage of the sleep time, just basically presenting it in a different way. So not even 1% of the of the sleep time, 0.3% of the sleep time was spent below 90, and 0.1% was spent below 88, and then 0% of it was spent below 85, and so on. Pulse rate statistics. So again, the average pulse rate was 55 beats per minute. I don't know why there's no minimum. Not sure what that's about. Maximum, it was 75, which is also relatively low. Okay, on to the more interesting stuff, the graphics. Everyone likes a nice visually appealing graphic. So we'll start right at the top. Peripheral arterial tonometry, respiratory events. So what's important to make note of here is the time is down at the bottom, right? So this is 11:09, and over here is 5:39 a.m. So what you need to do is when you see things on the graph up here, you have to go down to the bottom to see what time it was. So for example, here's an event. This blue bar represents an event, and it happened around 2:39 a.m. This isn't a super helpful graphic in my opinion. It's just a bunch of events clustered together. So you can see like this would be a bunch of events that are kind of clustered together. So you could go, well, it looks like there were a bunch of more events around this time, around 12:40 a.m. and I was in light sleep and, there's some context. And whatever was going on here, I wasn't having any events. I was sleeping on my right side. Okay, maybe I could sleep on my right side. Let's see, over here as well. Oh, no events while sleeping on my right side. Maybe that's something I could do. And my O2 was good. And my heart rate was stable and didn't have a lot of variability. Oh, looks like sleeping on my right side might be helpful. So I'm not going to spend much more time up here. It's pretty obvious, right? This is just, again, high frequency of events. So you can start to look for context in the graphs. Oh, I was on my right side here. Well, that's a little bit different. I was in a light stage of sleep. These little gray boxes are areas of the sleep study which are being excluded by the scorer who's manually editing the automated report. WatchPAT automatically generates a report, which is a pro of the service, in my opinion. So this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. So you can see on the left here, we have body positions. This line at the top indicates if this black line is up here, it means that you were sitting. If the black line's there on this, anywhere at this line, it means you're in prone. Same thing with left, right, blah, blah, blah. So if you're following the black line, we can see we're in supine, so laying on your back, and then data not available, in supine. Then we go up to laying on our right, back down to our back for a little bit, back up to sleeping on our right. So what we can say here is, well, this patient was sleeping on their right during, 11:39 to like 12:09 a.m. And you can follow that all the way along. This is sleeping again on the back, right? Because this supine is over here. This gray line is the back line or the supine line, and we can see that our trace is on that line. So if we're sleeping on the back, then it goes up to the sleeping on the right side, goes to sleep back to sleeping on our back to sleeping on our right side, back to sleeping on our back to sleeping on our right side, and then to our left side. We sit up, so we're awake probably, obviously. I mean, unless you're sitting up while you're sleeping, and back to the back, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to stop there. And then the orange stuff in the background is the snoring. And again, you got to look at the x-axis on the bottom, the timeline. For example, here, around 12:30, you can say there's all this snoring, and the height of this snoring is measured in decibels, and the y-axis or the units is over here. So the higher it is, the louder the snoring. Decibels is a measurement of sound, of audio, and the higher the bars, the louder the snoring. This snoring is far less than this snoring, both in volume and in frequency, because you can see there's a lot more snoring here, right? Back to back to back, bars back to back. And here it's kind of, there's a bar here, a little bit higher bar, tiny bar, no bars, smaller bar. Over here, there's no snoring. Snoring sets on. Snoring sets on, right? I'm going to have to do a second video about this because there's lots of context that I can go into as well, but I'm just not going to do that in this video. This is just basic how to read this, what it says, so you can look at it yourself and have your own independent thoughts about it. And then I will do another video where I actually talk about what certain things mean when you line up the data. So this graphic is oxygen saturation, which is this black line. You can see there's little numbers here on the left. This is 100, 90. And, this is helpful, but it's also kind of not helpful. I really like to look at oxygen saturation on a very small time frame because it allows you to extract a lot of context. When it's zoomed out like this, you can see macro patterns, and you can definitely glean important information, but it's severely limited in my opinion. So on the top, you can just see this is oxygen saturation. When it goes down, it means the oxygen's going down. And again, you can start to line that up with things. You can say, okay, oxygen drops here and it kind of stays down here and it keeps dropping down. And what's going on here? Well, I'm in a light stage of sleep. I'm sleeping on my back. Oh, okay, I'm sleeping on my back. And then what happens? I go up to my right side and there's no snoring and my oxygen levels are stabilized. Okay, well, maybe I should sleep on, and also my heart rate, and I'm even in deep sleep. Oh, okay, maybe I should try sleeping on my right more. It seems to statistically be the better option. And we do see this a lot. It's called positional apnea. Almost everyone is going to have worse apnea on their back. That's just standard. It just makes sense, right? Because your tongue and all your soft tissues and stuff are kind of crowding and dropping back into your airway. So anyways, this is oxygen saturation as percentage. So anything between this gray line and this gray line is 100 to 90%. You can see it drops below 90% a few times. There's one big one here. Another thing with pulse oximeters, sometimes there's artifacts, meaning you move the little sensor and sometimes there's huge drops and people panic about this. Sometimes they're real drops, but typically, when they're super short-lived and they drop way down, it's often just an artifact. I know that can scare people because, there's alarms, they'll start vibrating, start making noise, and you look and it's like 70% and you think your whole system's shutting down. But it's typically not the case. This, I would imagine, is a false positive. It's just probably moving around and the sensor is not grabbing the information properly. And then on the bottom here, we have the pulse rate. You gotta change the units though, right? So the units for the oxygen saturation are over here, but the units for the pulse rate are over here in beats per minute. So at the bottom, there's 35 beats per minute, and at the top, there's 200 beats per minute. And if you're kind of confused looking at this graphic, a good way to a mental thing you can do is just, when you're looking at one, you just obliterate the other. So what do I mean by that? If you're looking at pulse rate, imagine none of this black stuff was here, none of this writing was here, none of this over here was there. It's just blank. And then it makes more sense. Remember, these numbers aren't there, just these numbers, because this is the pulse rate side, right? And then you can look at it and it makes a little more sense. So as you can see, again, the same comment as before, it doesn't help a whole lot looking at it from so far out, from 30,000 feet. It helps to really, pulse oximetry, the greatest fruit you can yield from it is from looking on very zoomed in time frames and lining it up with like respiratory disturbance. For example, like flow limitation, which you can see in the air curve from, whatever PAP or nasal cannula. It goes from left to right still, right? The time on the bottom still applies. And you can see, for example, here, there's very stable heart rate. And then you see some variability and it's sporadic. Same here. And then you have stable, 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 blah, blah, blah. Now, as I mention all the time, we do expect heart rate variability to go up during REM sleep. It's normal. And you can see that most of these values fall between 35 and 76 beats per minute. There's nothing that gets too crazy, like up above 100, because the unit's here on the right side. Let's not forget. Sleep stages. This is probably a fan favorite. Everyone likes the sleep stages. Oh, it's so interesting. We talk about REM and everything. So again, very straightforward. This is the x-axis of time, so 10 after 11 p.m. and then 5:40 a.m. And you just follow the trace. So this just means you're awake, 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 right? Because it's lining up with wake. And then it jumps to light sleep, right? Now it's lining up with light sleep. And then you wake up and back down to light sleep. And now where are we down here? Oh, we're at deep sleep. So deep sleep, deep sleep, deep sleep. And then we jump up to REM. And we're in REM from like, let's say 120 to, 140, 50. And then we go down to light sleep. And then we go down to deep sleep, right? Because that's lined up with deep sleep. And then we go up to wake. We're awake. Down to light sleep. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to do these. You can see that these are waking up. This is being awake, waking up, waking up, waking up, etc. All right, body position statistics. So we'll start with this pie over here. It's just a pie chart. The pie represents 100% of something, right? So you could say like, just over 50% of the night you spent in the supine position, which is on your back. And then the next dominant position was the right. And we had kind of negligible trace amounts of sleeping prone, and on the left side, prone would be lying on your stomach. So here's just a more detailed breakdown of statistics in each sleeping position. So in the supine position, for example, we spent 150 minutes sleeping. It was just over 51% of the sleep time, which remember, I just pointed out. The RDI on our back, so when we isolate looking at what our RDI is for sleeping on our back, is 33.6. The AHI is a little bit lower, recognizing the rear is again, right, in the RDI. And then the ODI on our back is about 18.4. Prone, it doesn't have a lot of data, so we've got to be careful, right? We don't want to go, we should sleep prone because we have an RDI of 0. Well, we only spent 17 minutes sleeping prone, right? So it's super limited with respect to what it can tell us. The right side, however, has a lot of time slept there. So let's look there to see, if there's anything we can understand about our sleep or the nature of our sleep. The RDI is 19.4. Oh, interesting. That's less than the sleeping on our back. And the AHI is 10, which is far less than the AHI of sleeping on our back. Interesting. Maybe we should sleep on our side. And then what's interesting too is they basically go, okay, well, if we just combine all the positions that aren't sleeping on the back, what does that look like? And then you can compare that against, again, sleeping on the back. So for example, the RDI of sleeping in every other position except the back is 17.1 and then 8.1 for the AHI. Snoring statistics, kind of a little bit interesting, but not a whole lot helpful. Some people can snore and not have any issues. Snoring is a precursor to sleep disordered breathing. Yes, snoring can wake you up from the audio of it, from the vibrations of it. In the next video, I'll show you some little interesting tricks on how you can, for example, look at snoring to help you understand what type of respiratory event you might be experiencing. But, just to do you guys the service and go over this properly, snoring level is in decibels, which is just a measurement of sound. I'm not going to get into that. 40 is the minimum that anything below that, they're kind of like, well, it's just, there's too much background noise, signal to noise ratio isn't worth it. But it's saying for how long, for how many minutes of sleep was snoring greater than 40 decibels or the lowest amount that they're recording. And Their answer is, well, it was 95.5 minutes, which is about 33% of the sleep time. And you can go over here and go, okay, well, what about like above 60 decibels? Oh, it was only a minute and 1.7 minutes, which isn't even 1% of sleep time. The mean is about 42 decibels. Here's the sleep stages pie charts. We can see, again, the pie chart's just representing 100% of something. So you can say you were asleep for about 75% of the night, and you were awake for about 27%, which of course is broken down here as well. And then for sleep stages, you can see what percentage spent in REM, light, deep, and there are averages for these. Averages, everyone's a little bit different, but it can start to give you an idea of, there's all sorts of things we can do with sleep architecture stages. For example, like Krakau's REM consolidation index, or REM is typically supposed to be about 25% of sleep. So if it's something severely suppressed from that, we can start to get color. It gives us color into what's happening with us, whether or not we're getting deep sleep or not, which again is supposed to be about 25%. The sleep stages is helpful. Like if you're not getting any REM, for example, that means something. You need REM sleep. We all need REM sleep. These sleep stages exist for a reason. And if you're not transitioning properly into them, or if you're always getting bumped out of REM sleep, then it can provide us with some information. And the really helpful thing is like being able to track this stuff over time. And you can start to see correlates, for example, of, the percentage of REM sleep that you might get and then how good you feel. And this is why I constantly bombard you guys with this. I know it's abuse at this point, but with this idea that you should really try to record your data. And yes, I know it takes away from the mystery of life and, we're going to science our way all to a singularity, blah, blah, blah. But it's still, just bear with it on this one for me because it's worthwhile. Record your data. Record how you subjectively feel. All of it. Oscar provides that software, and you can even record how you subjectively feel. I have videos about that. Do it. Trust me, because you're not going to remember. Do not rely upon your memory to tell you in 3 months from now how you felt on X day with X settings and so on. And over time, you smash yourself into the wall enough, and you'll find a course of treatment or a combination of treatment variables which work for you that you may not have found had you not recorded long-term data and had the ability to look at it from a different vantage point. Okay, speech over. I'll leave you in peace there. And then there's this one graphic at the end, which I'm not a big fan of because mild, moderate, severe, and using a big bar of red and a small bar of green is super misleading. Doesn't tell us a whole lot, but it just summarizes here the quote unquote severity of your sleep apnea or sleep disordered breathing. And I'm going to reiterate, because it bears repeating, AHI and RDI are not a complete measurement of sleep disordered breathing. I have seen many patients with RDIs even less than 5 who are severely debilitated from their symptoms. And then they go on PAP and it's all resolved. So what does that say to you? Yes, AHI, and then even more so, RDI are helpful metrics which can capture some cohort of the true sleep disordered breathing demographic. But, huge but, biggest but you've ever seen in your life, but it marginalizes many others and very poorly represents the difficulty and severity that those patients are experiencing or going through. To be kind to you, I'll end my speech there, and I'm going to keep making noise until the temple collapses and we erect a new one because I just can't stand this anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, I sleep peacefully at night, but it's a life objective of mine now to continue to make noise in this direction. Because eventually the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So make some noise. Don't let them put you around with the AHI and RDI metrics. They're very poor measurements of someone's sleep disordered breathing.